Hello and welcome back to the Information Command Center. And we are here starting off on a somber note. Sad news for me personally. We just learned of the passing of Joyce Auguste. And for those of you who are in tune with St. Lucian culture, you will know that Joyce Auguste is one of the individuals, she's an icon, St. Lucian cultural icon. And she dedicated herself, her life, to the folk music, St. Lucian music. She established the Hero Nora Voices, one of the choral groups. And of course, that became a major popular folk band back in the 1970s. And Joyce Auguste also worked as a music supervisor of the St. Lucian school system, the education system, and introduced folk music into the school curriculum. I'm here alongside Primer Hutchinson, Lisa Joseph, if I did not do that introduction. As I said, the news of Joyce Auguste's passing, a very unsettling, Primus, and I know that you, but more than I, would be quite familiar with Joyce Auguste. She's a lady that often reminded me of how to be a lady. That's one thing about Joyce Auguste that I remember most profoundly, and always had that great posture. She always would remind me about pronunciation and of course her love for music. I remember her on the school circuit coming into the various schools and helping out with that. So for you, when you heard of Joyce's passing, I'm sure it must have evoked some memories.
Oh yes, it did. Joyce, for us who worked with Radio St. Lucian, you did as well. She was a prominent feature at RSL. She hosted the program Music Education for Schools. I mean, every primary, particularly primary school, had their transistor. And I remember the program came on around 10 a.m. or so, and the school, there was this, the sound system at the school, the loudspeakers and so on, so that all the schools at 10 o'clock glued onto the radio, listening to Joyce's program, the music program of schools. And at RSL, Joyce was always in, and she was such a vivacious personality. Yes. You know, you couldn't miss her. She was, anytime she was around, and you had to pay attention. And of course, like you said, when it comes to grammar and pronunciation, at that time RSL was, of course, known for when it comes to broadcasting, the broadcasting ethics and so on. Joyce made sure that, you know, we kept on toes when it comes to that. So it's a great miss for us, for St. Lucia and the cultural community as well. You know, may she rest in peace.
Indeed, may she rest in peace. And here at the GIS NTN, of course, we'll be having a number of programs that will be celebrating the achievements, contributions of Joyce Auguste later on. And now we move on to the more substantial matter, while we are here in the Information Command Center as St. Lucia continues to respond to COVID-19. We know that the ball has been set. We're rolling on until June 4th, where we'll be seeing the complete opening of the St. Lucian economy, and that will be the borders. Of course, there is that contingent there of all things being equal. St. Lucia will be moving on, pressing on to try to get its economic activity back together. It is a mammoth task because, of course, that is largely dependent on what is happening outside, meaning the international community. But here on the domestic front, the government of St. Lucia is giving its all into ensure that there isn't economic collapse while COVID-19 is continuing the world over. Here to discuss some of the poignant issues with us is the Minister for Economic Development, Housing, Urban Renewal, Transport and Civil Aviation, that is the Honorable Guy Joseph. Let me also indicate that we invited members of the media to submit questions, as this serves as a virtual press conference, and we have received a number of questions from the media which will be posing to the Minister. We also invite members of the public for their own interjection for their comments, questions, and that you can send it to askmeanything@gmail.com. That again for members of the public, askmeanything@gmail.com. You still have a chance to send in your comments and questions. We will be posing that to Honorable Guy Joseph. I know it's a mouthful, and so now I say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Good
very
afternoon.
much, Lisa, for having me. Want to wish everyone a pleasant day, and also to take the opportunity to welcome those within my constituency who would be following the program, because I think I did see some advertisement going out that I would be on today. In fact, I actually got a call from somebody in the US indicating that they would be following. So I just want to say hi to Janelle up in the Boston area. Also, I have Mr. Zidane Mitchell in studio here following what is happening. He was the youth parliamentarian which represented Castries Southeast in the youth debate recently. And what we've been attempting to do is to get them a first-hand feel of what it is to be the parliamentary rep and a minister in government. So he would be spending some time with me at the office, getting a sense of what it's like being involved in the day-to-day runnings of government.
And I do hope that before the program concludes that we can have a word or two with Zidane so that he can talk to us about what that experience is like for him. We want to really start getting into the meat of things because it's going to be quite a heavy conversation. The economic recovery for St. Lucia, the fear is, Minister, that as we are trying to save ourselves economically, that health threat from COVID-19 remains, not just internal but external. So the number one concern for the St. Lucian public is the fact that we are racing on to open up the tourism industry. I want to hear from you, your thoughts on how much of a risk is the government of St. Lucia taking by going that route?
Okay, so I know you said we are racing on. I don't think we are racing on. I really think that there's been a lot of very careful calculation of what needs to happen. And as anything else, the Prime Minister indicated several times during the period leading up to all of the measures that was taken to deal with COVID-19, that the first priority was dealing with the health crisis or the potential health crisis that we were facing. We needed to buy as much time as possible in order to be in a better place to respond to the pandemic. We had issues like not being able to do the test in St. Lucia, having to wait to go to Trinidad. We did not have the PPEs that is required for our frontliners. We had issues in relation to where would you house these persons if you had a major outbreak on the island. And all of these factors, we needed to better prepare ourselves. The world itself was trying to get as much information on the coronavirus themselves. The people that normally we would wait for to get guidance and direction from themselves were trying to find out, well, what is really going on with this novel virus. And so all of what we did, St. Lucia being one of the first ones to deal with the matters pertaining to the cruise sector, to put measures in place internally to be able to limit crowding up of people, limiting activities. All of these we did. And the Prime Minister did make it very clear that our first priority was health. The economy would be the second phase of what we would be dealing with. So looking at the situation, I believe that, not I believe, the record is there to show. Sometimes it doesn't matter what we believe, it matters what the reality is. The reality is St. Lucia managed this health pandemic better than I would say any island within the region. And globally, we are among the top 5 nations in handling this global pandemic. So, given that outcome and being able to deal with the situation is to move to the next step of dealing with the economy. Now, you are right, the part of it is that it's still a global pandemic. The World Health Organization did not say that it's over. Countries are still trying to gauge where they are in the curve, whether they have peaked, whether they have leveled the curve sufficiently. But the country's economy cannot remain closed indefinitely. Because now you have to make a choice between, do I allow people to die physically or do I allow people to die economically? And one can lead to the other in the process. So it is striking that right balance between economic activity and health concerns. So on the health concern side, one of the last areas that we were focused on is outfitting VH Hospital to be the isolation center. So while we were just using the hospital because we had moved into OKEU, it had not been fully outfitted to have all of the separations and the patient wards and everything. As we speak, as of Saturday, the contractor began work, and we expect that at least 20 isolation rooms would be available by the 1st of June.
That is at Victoria.
That is at Victoria Hospital. That is separate and apart from all of the other facilities that are being used for quarantine and the first response centers in Grozile and the other places. So VH is being fully outfitted to be that center, so that in the event when we open the economy, that you get an outbreak in certain areas, you are better prepared to respond. Because here's the reality. From all what we are hearing from science, COVID is going to be here for a while. By the time we get the right vaccine, the production of the vaccine to be able to be distributed to the people who need it, and that would be on a global scale, it may be a year and 18 months from now, as the experts are saying. And I can tell you, from January, they were still saying a year and 18 months. Today, 5 months later, they are still saying a year and 6 months. So clearly, we are up against it. The reality is, can we survive as a country just focusing on the health without dealing with the economic crisis? And that is what brings us to the point where we are taking very measured approach. And St. Lucia continues to be a world leader in dealing with this matter. If you look at the plan outlined by the team for the reopening of the borders in St. Lucia, and for some reason, when we speak about reopening the border, we have to be thinking of 2 borders, 758, 759, and the borders that are really the airport and the seaports. So I think that we have a comprehensive plan. And our plan is so comprehensive that the first world countries are looking at what we are doing, and they are not able to even begin to measure up to the standards that are set for us to reopen. In discussions with the airline industry, while they would like to start service, so if I take the report that I got from what is happening in Miami, while we are being criticized as a third world developing country, in Miami, I understood that you have to pay $200 US to get a COVID test. And it takes you up to 5 days to get the results. But if you look at our requirements, there must be a 48-hour test prior to boarding the airline. Thankfully, to Taiwan, we were able to get some equipment and some of the devices that the people walking through can take the temperatures immediately and indicate. So I know that the team from the Ministry of Health did come in and give a full outline of what is required. In fact, I actually watched the Mr. Ragnanan, who's in charge of the public health aspect of it, give a full explanation of every aspect that they have agreed to and what it is going to be. So we now cautiously would be approaching the reopening of the economy in every sector.
But Mr. Minister, I was just thinking, with our advanced preparation and the challenges that you alluded to as far as perhaps Miami is concerned, would you think that maybe there may be a few, perhaps not loopholes, but that in the effort to deal with the situation, because the challenges are far greater than what we are experiencing as far as preparation is concerned. How would we be able to balance that in the fact that the borders are open and we'll be expecting visitors from the United States?
Well, we need to strike the right balance. So it is how close can they get to what our requirements are? At the same time, what can we adjust to meet them where they are in terms of striking the right balance between economic activity and health concerns? Secondly, people are only thinking sometimes when we speak about opening the borders of our tourists coming in. We have hundreds and hundreds, I might say thousands of St. Lucians who want to come back home. Right. Many of them have been stranded abroad for quite an extended period of time. They may have run out of money by now. Not they may. A lot of them have run out. So they're living in these places at the mercy of other individuals. A lot of these people want to come back home. Unless the flights begin to come in, some of these people cannot return. Even in these people returning, we have to take it on a phased approach as to how many can we handle at the quarantine facilities. Because given where they are coming from, a lot of them may need to be quarantined when they come in. So it is our own internal capacity to be able to handle a lot of these things that would come into play. Then the question remains the hotels that are being used as quarantine facilities. How long would they remain accessible as quarantine facilities if the other sectors of the economy open? So these are all factors that we must consider. But in the midst of all of this, if we have no economic activity, then what is going to happen to us internally? And this is the balance. And governance is not always easy, especially in these crisis situations. Because I can tell you, you open and there are 5 cases, and everybody wants to crucify the government. Because even if it is through their own carelessness that they contract the virus, they will still blame the government for getting the virus. But this is the reality. Are we going to keep the country shut indefinitely? Because if you do not accommodate the outside world, when you will want the outside world to accommodate you, they may just say, well, when I wanted to do business with you, you didn't want to do business with me. I've moved on. And I'm no longer available.
If we wait too long to get back in the fray, that we may actually be left out. And that brings us to the medium-term development strategy. That was launched earlier this year in February, and so there was a plan, also a financing plan for that as part of the whole national development plan. That has been, some would say that, don't want to use the word railroaded, but certainly COVID-19 has come and put a damper on what those development plans for St. Lucia would have been. We do have a question coming in from Michael George of The Voice newspaper, and he has asked, has COVID-19 in any way slowed down government's medium-term development strategy?
I would say yes, it has slowed down, but not in totality. So the one sector that is most impacted is the tourism sector. But I would say it has fast-tracked the plan for education, because it has forced the government into a situation where e-learning, which may have taken years to roll out, has now come, and it has forced us to be able to move speedily with getting e-education on the front burner. So you look at it from the standpoint. So while one aspect of the medium-term development plan is impacted negatively, the other part is impacted in a positive way, in that it has caused you to fast-track the process. You look at what has happened, internal security. What has happened with the enforcement of the curfew, the border, the cross points from zone 1 into zone 2, the regular presence of the police patrolling and all of that, has made St. Lucia a much safer environment to be in. So part of the plan was the area of security, and that has been enhanced as a result of the measures being introduced as a direct result of COVID-19. So I don't agree that it is just put a damper on everything that we were doing. In fact, it shows the relevance of what the overall development strategy, and when you have a balanced strategy, if it has done one thing, it has taught us that the approach that we took towards development was very balanced, social and economic. So let's look at infrastructure as an example, which was one of the key areas of the medium-term development strategy. Because you are not having the jobs that was generated through the tourism sector, which is heavily impacted, where do you take the slack? You take the slack through infrastructure. Improve on construction activity, generate more jobs in the construction sector, and let that be the stabilizer for the economy and economic activity at this point in time. You take agriculture, food security. We have to take food security in a very measured way. We will never be able to grow everything we need to feed ourselves. People's choices and preferences of food is different. So I've said it, will we grow rice to supply the amount of rice that we need in St. Lucia? Would we grow wheat to be able to produce flour? Would we look at producing flour from bananas? How quickly can we do these things? How big is the market? So a balanced approach is the short-term crops, which we said we will always depend on a certain measure of export, but then we are forced to look internally more at what we are producing and to use more of it. So I am 100% convinced that the medium-term development strategy was well thought out, and it shows its capacity to withstand the worst crisis that the world has experienced. Maybe we've been hearing that from since the 1930s, the Great Depression. So our ability to have come up in 3.5 years in government, to have developed a medium-term strategy that meets these objectives. And when I say we, I don't mean just the politicians. I mean the government in general, the public servants who are involved, the private sector, everybody. As a country, we were able in 3.5 years to come up with something, because I can tell you, there was a vision plan that was being worked on, and when I asked about the vision plan, I was told that it was never completed. That was being done by the previous government administration. We could not sit by and wait and say, because there's no plan, in 3.5 years we came up with a plan, and the plan is being tested at this point in time, and it is showing that this plan is very resilient and very relevant to the time that we are
and in. So and that's the follow-up to Michael's question of whether you be the expert. If he wants an explanation as to how the strategy could get St. Lucia out of the current financial situation.
I don't know that I'm trying to understand the rationale for the question, but here's what I would tell you. There's no one strategy that can get any country out of a crisis that is of global proportion. Number one, a number of the answers or reactions that are required does not originate with us. So we've done what we had to do. But because a lot of the other aspects of the economy depends on the outside world, then it is how quickly they can get to where we are. How many countries will get to be? We've been COVID-free twice during that period of time that we are dealing with, where all our cases, all the persons have recovered and there are no new cases. Not many countries are there. So if a St. Lucian was to travel overseas tomorrow, they are less likely to be denied because they are coming from a country that is COVID-free. But the same cannot be said of Canada, the UK, and the US, which are our main source markets. So the answer to Micah's question is that while we have a plan and it can work internally, but it is limited in its capacity because some of what we require comes from outside. Where do you get foreign direct investment? Where do you export your goods and services to? So let's take employment as an example. While the government was successful in reducing unemployment from 25% to 16.8%, well, just I like to be precise on numbers. A little below 25, it was 24 point something percent. We went to 16.8. Youth unemployment from about 44% down to 31%. In a matter of 2 months, that was turned upside down, where your unemployment figures may be higher than it's been at any period of time. Not through anything that the government did or did not do, but through a crisis that developed internationally.
But so the question now would be, and to back to Michael to emphasize that, would the strategy, if we apply the strategy, you are confident that the strategy as it is laid out will be able to give St. Lucia that economic, or lead St. Lucia to a better economic footing?
Yes, the strategy, when fully implemented or partially implemented, puts St. Lucia on a better financial footing. Because let's look at what education. One of the things we were doing is training people for the outside market. So how many people, how many young St. Lucians we had who are trained working on the cruise ships? 1,000. Because of what has happened in the cruise industry, these 1,000 young people return home and are now unemployed. You look at the number of farm workers we had going to Canada. Even if they came in recently, and thanks to the Ministry of Labor, we were able to get a flight to come in to pick up some of these workers along with Vincentians and others to go back to the farm work in Canada. But all of these are impacted because St. Lucia cannot stand entirely on its own and be self-sustained. Not even the US can be self-sustained. And I've heard a lot of discussion about an over-dependence on tourism. To use COVID-19 to make the determination that there's an over-reliance on tourism, in my mind, is misguided. Let me give you an example. Saudi Arabia does not depend on tourism. They depend on oil. Trinidad does not depend on tourism. They depend on industry and, well, Tobago to an extent tourism, but Trinidad in itself is more trade and oil. So you look at what has happened to this country. Take the UK, take Italy, take all of the places. There is no differentiation today in what industry you depended upon. So whether we depended on any other industry, it would be impacted. The US does not depend on tourism. Outside of the US, they have the capacity internally with their population to be able to manage. You look at Singapore. There is not a country in the world today that have the most diversified economy, Germany or you call it. Every single country has been severely impacted by this coronavirus. So it is clear that it is not what your economy depended upon that would make the determination as to what has happened. I believe that tourism is a vital link in where we are. But look at where we've been going. We passed the Headquarters Legislation Act. So we encourage companies to come in and establish their headquarters here. We were working with Lausanne University to have their branch campus here, because the longest stay over tourists in a country is a foreign student. And you look at what happened to Dominica when Ross University left Dominica. Yes. You look at what's happening to Grenada with St. George's and all the students returning. So we need to be realistic. Every time it's convenient, people come back and say, oh, you should not be doing this. And when you're not doing it, then they find another reason why you should be doing it.
Mr. Minister, I'm just thinking, the manufacturing sector, how impactful do you think it can be on the economy currently?
Okay, so let's look at the manufacturing sector and how it has worked. When we went for the lockdown, the manufacturing sector was shut down. What we are the best at producing maybe is wrong. Windward and Leeward Brewery, St. Lucia Distillers, two of our leading manufacturers who have a good export market. In dealing with COVID, what did we have to do? we had to shut down the sector. They were getting to the point where it was almost unsustainable, and they would not even be able to supply the outside market. The reality remains with oil. So let me use oil to highlight my point. Oil is at a negative price today because all the tanks are filled, all the storage facilities, and it is being stored on the ships out there in the ocean and costing an exorbitant amount of money. So our ability and our cost, one of the biggest factors that impacts our manufacturing sector is the cost of electricity. Because we will never be able to adequately compete in a number of areas in manufacturing. There's a reason why during the time of Sir John, when he established those facilities, like the Bell Fashions, he built the factory shells and he found the investors to come in. And no matter, as a child growing up, I remember, you know, there was these elastics that you used to put the clips in, and you got paid $5 for doing 100. I don't know how many people in here with me would be familiar with that. But you produce these for the factories. And in those days, every family in every home would be doing a certain quota and would be getting some additional revenue. These days are gone. These jobs have gone to China, Mexico, and these places, Bangladesh, and because the cost of production is a fraction of our cost of production. In my discussions with Trinidad about our plantain and our bananas being exported to Trinidad to make chips and other things, I said, why? We have the bananas right here. Why not open the factory here? And they tell me, your cost of electricity here. It is cheaper for me to buy the product in St. Lucia, ship it to Trinidad, make the product, and ship it back to St. Lucia to sell, than to come and establish a factory and produce it here. This is our reality. So we have to live within what our reality is. And this is why there must be a deliberate approach towards how we develop this country and where you have the competitive advantage. What is it that we are the best at? What is it that we can outbid or compete with other persons and be the best at what we do? And these are the sectors that we have to focus on, because that is what is going to bring us the greater returns. So what we are doing now, when the idea of Ojo Labs, which a lot of people have chosen to criticize, what has happened is the idea of Ojo Labs was for Invest St. Lucia to come in, be a part of the layout, get an understanding of what a facility of this nature is going to be, do the outfitting, and now invite those agents to come to St. Lucia and say, look here, I have a call center ready to go. All you need to do is to get the business and come and start operating. That is the type of business that we can attract. And because of our ability to speak the English language, not with my accent, because I always criticize, but St. Lucians, our people generally, our ability to speak English and to be understood is as good as anywhere else. So we have an advantage in this area. We have to capitalize on that advantage. And so it is where we position St. Lucia.
And we frankly, by the way, just to interject, because I was biting my tongue on the accent part, but at least let me say that, because sometimes the call centers, those people on the other end can be very abrupt.
Oh,
but
yes,
I think that St. Lucians, by virtue of just being hospitable, that perhaps we can definitely have an edge in that.
In fact, outside, people talk about the pitons, they talk about the sea, the sun, the beaches, and everything about St. Lucia that is unique. what we are best known for is the friendliness and how genuine our people are.
Yes.
For me, that is the greatest asset of St. Lucia. And every tourist you meet, they would tell you, I find that your people are genuinely nice. They don't give you these fake smiles and this kind of make-believe. It's genuinely a nice atmosphere and ambience to be in. So that coupled with our natural beauty and attraction and tapping into the, somebody used a word to describe, said our people are pleasantly rude. Even the rudeness comes with some pleasantries.
And if I may interject as well, Mr. Minister, when you speak of accent, what we need to consider is the fact that you may have your accent, but being fluent and articulate is what will get your message across. So accent, but being fluent.
We'll need to have that accent conversation.
When you're in politics, people find something to criticize you about. So either they criticize you about your background, your education, your looks, your complexion. Mature people can look beyond that. So I can make fun out of these things and I can move on. They can call what names they want. The reality is it's the substance that you have to deal with, not the appearance and all of these things. And for me, I try to deal with the substantive matters that are before me. So I really believe that St. Lucia is well placed and we can harness the potential. And that's what I love about this Prime Minister. He always focuses on what our potential is and how we can maximize our potential. So you can have all the potential to be the most brilliant scholar, but that can remain just potential until you act on it and it becomes reality.
To actionize it. Yes. And now we want to get really, and then Primus, that's where you will begin to go into the Creole. Now let's get into some of the heavier matters as far as our economic recovery is concerned. Capital projects, that has been articulated by the government as being central to our economic recovery. The undertaking of the projects at this time, we can get into it a little later on, but the International Monetary Fund, we did get a drawdown there of $29.2 million there for us, and that was said to have been for to go towards the sort of recovery of the unemployed, as well as the health sector as well. A question coming in from Michael. He wants to know, are there conditions imposed by the IMF regarding that loan to St. Lucia? If there are conditions, to explain what those conditions are, and what is the guarantee that you can give, Minister, that the loan from the IMF will be used explicitly for the purposes outlined by the IMF? Because on the ground there is a lot of concern that the IMF funds have been diverted for the capital projects, Ojo Labs, the paying for DSH roads, as well as the relocation of the meat processing plant, and so that the government is not doing as stipulated by the IMF.
If these persons have that information, I would love them to put it out. You see, we've got to get to the stage in our development where what is speculation and rumor remains speculation and rumor. And if the IMF is an international agency that monitors what they do, they set the conditions, and the rules are very stringent as far as how you use their resources. So I can tell you off the bat, the IMF loan is partly for budget support, and it stipulates what it cannot be used for. It cannot be used to pay debt, and it cannot be used to pay government salaries. Now, I know all of this discussion is geared towards paying salaries. oh, we've misused the resources of the country. That's what people say. I challenge anybody. So you hear about we've paid for a DSH road. Which road is DSH own? Does DSH own a road in St. Lucia? Is DSH driving on a road in St. Lucia? I mean, I'm giving you an example. With the development of the project in Dennery, the abandoned hotel project there, do you know that the road, the highway was earmarked to be relocated to be almost to the back of Baudelaire? And do you know who was paying for that road, for that development? It wasn't the developer paying for that road. So for these people who have political aspirations, to want to come in and castigate, you have to relocate roads at certain points in time. Because if the location of a road, so I'm giving you an example of another road being relocated. The road to Vieux Fort proper, the concrete road, the old S Street by Sandy Beach. The road is now going along the airport fence. So who is this road for? Is this road for DSH also? Because this road is being developed with a master plan for what you want Vieux Fort to become. So Vieux Fort becomes, that area by Sandy Beach becomes an area that Invest St. Lucia is now developing into smaller package lots, fully serviced, so that locals can go in, build mini hotels, guest houses, restaurants, and all of these things. So are we going to say, do not relocate the road because the people going to benefit from the road? We made it very clear that with the location of the terminal and the traffic flow for that area, you would redirect the roads in that general area. Now, when you are genuine and when you are honest, and you come and you put everything that you are doing on the table, people criticize you because they find that what you are doing, because they say hindsight is vision is 2020 when it comes to looking back. The previous government, and the evidence is there to show, that they said to DSH, we will give you everything you want. We just have to word it in a way that it doesn't appear that you get, in essence, paraphrasing. We don't operate that way. Whatever we do is above board, because for me, I don't believe that anything government is doing should be secretive. It's the people's business. So that's why I tell them, just remove the obligation for the oath that I have taken and allow me to disclose everything that I need to disclose. Because I cannot be operating under an oath where I cannot disclose, but the other people are at liberty to say what they want, and you cannot adequately respond because you would be in breach of the oath that you have taken. So I want to be clear. No road was built for DSH. No garbage dump was closed for DSH. Does DSH benefit from it? Yes. Now that's the difference. And if you look at the environmental impact study for the mangrove in Vieux Fort and the seepage that was happening from the dump into the mangrove, the evidence is that the same National Trust and environmental people and everybody who conveniently says one thing, they knew about the seepage, they knew what was happening there, and there were already plans that the garbage dump is badly located. If you want to develop Vieux Fort, you have your international airport. You have the George Odlum Stadium, now being used as the St. Jude Hospital. You have all that prime property that can be developed, and you want a garbage dump in the middle of it. If the garbage dump was closed for DSH, that's the greatest blessing that Vieux Fort received. And I have no fear in saying that, because I would hate to know. You see, even where the garbage dump is in Dayglow, if I could have taken out that garbage dump in the middle of my constituency, I would have taken it out there a long time ago. We need to be practical. The devaluation of property in that area was as a result of the garbage dump. Why would you want a garbage dump in the middle? I mean, along roads on both sides. You're driving through there. The stench that is coming from this place, the flies, the birds. I mean, are we real in this country? Do we really want this country to develop? So to say that we were doing these things to facilitate DSH, if we did it to facilitate DSH, then it's the greatest blessing that Viewfort has received. Because that's the worst location. And we have to remember when these sites were established. You remember the garbage dump at Shock?
Yes,
Yep.
I have memories.
Can
of
you
that.
imagine that dump site still being there today? Where would Windham, is that still the name? It's not Windham.
Not anymore. Morgan Bay?
Yes, yes.
Morgan
Windham
Bay.
Morgan Bay.
Would
yes.
Morgan Bay be there? Now you have, would Halcyon still be able to operate as efficiently? The cinema, KFC right across there, Mega Massy.
And now we have vendors who go just a little lower down. They are occupying space there as well.
So we have to be practical. In the days when we established these garbage dumps, you had limited population, you had a limited amount of garbage, the land was not prime land for development. So at that time, it may have been the most convenient place. But as you develop, these things change. And people need to stop seeing everything from a political eye and start seeing things from a developmental standpoint. Is the closure of the garbage dump a good thing because of the location? The answer is yes. Is the relocation of the road a good thing? Yes. So let's say the road cost you, and from what I know, that road was a design, finance, construct project. So that road has not even been paid for from what I know. I am subject to correction on this, but as far as I know, that road was designed and is being paid under the design, finance, construct proposal. So there's nothing unbecoming of these projects. And why is the project affiliated to DSH? So could the DSH site have operated? The meat processing plant. I always said the meat processing plant should have been built in Bexar because all the butchers are basically from Mac. That is my political preference. Is that the best option for the country? Because if we want to look at things from a political, if you take the number of butchers in Mac, it adds up to more than everybody else in the country. Now, would you take all the animals to be slaughtered down to Viewfort to be slaughtered and then transported back to Castries to be sold? How much would a pound of beef be? What kind of vehicles would these butchers need? So there are lots of factors that come into play when it comes to what we are looking at. And we have to understand the concept of the meat processing plant, which was began under the United Workers' Party back in 2006. This was being developed when the government had put in a number of measures in place for the various bloodline of the animals that was required to be slaughtered. The new government came in, finished the meat processing plant, but abandoned the process of any animals to be slaughtered. So where are the animals today to be slaughtered at the meat process? They don't exist. The butchers have difficulty finding a few cows to slaughter. So are we going to import the cows or whatever we are going to use there? So we had a plan. The other government came in, did not continue with the plan, and so everything went haywire. So people, it's not fair to attack foreign investors on the basis of your politics.
Mr. Minister, we have a question from Solange Alfred of HTS, and the question is, the government has come under heavy criticism for moving forward with capital projects, while simultaneously requesting some civil servants to take a blended salary of 50% cash and 50% bonds. How does the government justify its actions? And why was this the route chosen to stimulate the economy?
That was not a route chosen to stimulate the economy. So let's put things in perspective. All of these projects had been identified, the source of financing had been identified, everything was in place prior to COVID. So you raise the money, okay, so I'm not even going into all of the other things. DVRP, Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project, which started back in 2010. You had engaged designers, the Dennery Hospital, the flood mitigation works in the various communities, the community centers. You have paid for the designs, you have done everything. The Choiseul Secondary School, the Dennery Primary School, all of these DVRP projects. Are you going to say, because of COVID, we are going to abandon all of these projects? The airport project, which has come under heavy criticism, that we should stop the project. If you stop the project, you don't have the money. Because you negotiated a loan. You see, all of a sudden, people want to make it look like you can take project money to pay salaries. Project money, if the bank gives you a loan to buy a car, you have the loan approved, this is what it is for. The week before you buy the car, there's a hurricane, so the road to your home is damaged. You can no longer drive your car to your home. Would you tell the bank, I will take the money that I was buying the car and I'll fix the road? Would the bank agree for you to fix the road with the car? The road has no insurance. There's no coverage that if you don't pay the loan, because the car becomes security for itself. So it is not automatic that you can just turn over loans and you can do something else with it. I'll give you an example. Using our own Caribbean Development Bank. What happened? We have loans owed to Caribbean Development Bank. We had a special facility at a very concessionary rate. Instead of Caribbean Development Bank saying, I'm going to give you a deferred payment for that period of time, you know what they proposed? The loan we had at the special rate facility that we had not drawn down on, they gave themselves the loan to pay our loans. So we now have a loan to pay the loan. Now that is our own Caribbean Development Bank. You think the loans they were giving us for the school buildings in Lage and the different communities, you think they're going to say, okay, you don't need to build these schools anymore. You can now take the money and put it into budget and support your budget. It does not work that way. And the people, and I will say this, they always tell me the best brains are in government. Because these are the people with all the degrees and all the knowledge. So they have the best brains and they don't understand that. They don't understand that you cannot just take a loan and repurpose it.
Can you ask for it though?
You
can you engage the bank and ask for at least for you to redirect?
So let me give you an example. With the Taiwanese loan, there was 20 million for the agricultural farm roads. Because we had not signed the agreement on this, we asked to repurpose this loan. So the 20 million for the agricultural farm roads is now going into budget support. So you think we can go back to the Taiwanese and say, okay, the 100 million for the airport, We should take this money and pay so you don't develop the airport. What is your justification for continuing to collect the head tax? Because remember, it was the same government of the day who said, there's not a block in the ground. It is not fair to be charging people an airport development tax when you are not building an airport. So, the revenue stream for paying back the airport is the airport development tax. If you are not building the airport and you stop collecting the money, will the Taiwanese still proceed? Because it's not the Taiwanese government, it's the Exim Bank that you have negotiated with. Will they give you the loan without a revenue stream to pay it back? So you want to forego, and it's going to take you more than a year to go back and renegotiate this process. Because you can ask Dr. Anthony. He said how long it took to negotiate the loan for St. Jude. And that is why they could not finish St. Jude, because of the time factors with raising them. After we've gone through 2 years plus of negotiating, we've finally come to the point where you can implement a project. So let's look at the economic side of this, because we've looked at the financial side. I'm telling you, from the discussions, and the Ministry of Finance developed a matrix for the government to show all the loans that could be renegotiated. And the airport loan cannot be renegotiated. The outright answer would be no. They would not proceed with giving you the loan. Then they said, open the logbox and take the money from the logbox arrangement. You've already committed, you've signed a contract for the airport, you've done all of that. There's 80 million in the logbox. It means if you break the logbox, you're in breach of the contractual arrangement that you had. You use your credibility for all the other loans that you have, because all the other loans are with the same institution. And in business, that is what people don't understand. Credibility means a lot. Once people feel you are not credible, they don't do business with you. If they think that you are not a person of your word, they become skeptical. You cannot be trusted. So if they say, okay, we've disbursed X amount of money for the roads, we're not disbursing anymore. So you put in all of these projects on hold. Now let's look at the flip side of the benefits of these projects. If you don't do the airport project, the 300 or 700 people you're going to employ during the construction phase remains unemployed. Let's look at the indirect employment. The number of truckers, equipment owners, vendors, the spillover of that money stops circulating. So all the material you're going to buy from the hardware stores. So let's not look at the airport project. Let's look at all of the construction projects. If you stop all major construction activity, what happens? The hardwares are not selling. So half of their staff will be laid off. The gas stations are not selling. Less people are traveling. The minibus drivers are not making money. Then the consumption is lower. We must understand how the economy works. So the more economic activity you have, and the same economists will tell you about the multiplier effect of money. That every dollar spent, you multiply it by 4. That's the economic impact. So if you spend 100 million on the airport, and let us say 30 million of that money is direct expenditure into your local economy, you can multiply that by 4. That's an impact of 120 million you have in the local economy. Eventually the money comes back to government. So saying that you should stop this project means that the rest of the people who are unemployed should remain unemployed. And we never asked public servants to take a pay cut. I think our information is being misrepresented out there. A deferred payment for 3 months is what we ask. which amounts to 1.5 months less your pay for the year. So let's put that in perspective. If you are telling me every public servant in the country who is guaranteed employment for the next year, guaranteed, will get 10.5 months guaranteed full pay for the year, is not willing to make that little sacrifice, and at the end of that year will get the 3 months half pay with a 3% interest. And then, now remember, I am representing a constituency in excess of 15,000 people. Who is more important in the process? While at the same time, the 70 cruise ship workers have come back home, no salary. The 40 or 60 taxi drivers, no salary. The drivers who used to drive for these companies, no salary. The people who have been laid off from the hotels, no salary. And we are asking public servants to make a sacrifice for 3 months to get half pay, while they have a moratorium in the banks and everything on their payments. For that matter, when we did the calculations, when Ministry of Finance did the calculations, most of the public servants will go home with more cash. And I said most, not all. Most of them will go home with more cash, because it means that the PAYE is not deducted from the 50%. No taxes are deducted. Everything is on the second half that will come at the end of the year with the 3% interest. They don't, if there are no deductions for their loans or anything like that, the actual cash in hand may be more that they are going home with. Now, I know that in dealing with this matter, more politics came into this than good sense. Because what options does it leave the government with? If you cannot pay and you default, and we've been saying that, all of these monies that we are raising outside of St. Lucia to help St. Lucia, if these institutions see that your people are not willing to make a sacrifice, so the money from the IMF is to go and pay the unemployed people who are not affiliated to the NIC. Because the people who are working with the NIC, some of them have been receiving their payments. I know some of them have received up to the $1,500. But nobody will come and talk about the good. Everybody talks about the bad. So the situation that we have found ourselves in is that we must meet our loan obligations.
So on that point, Minister, but also that grades 1 to 6 of the public servants their salaries remain intact. So we're looking at from grade 7 and onward. But on our Ask Me Anything platform, we have a question coming in with regard to that from Sandra, wanting to know the question here. Okay, so many of them coming in, I lost that. But the gist of the question was why is it that the government is now at this stage where it cannot meet its obligations without having public servants have this mixed payment or deferred payment for their salaries? Why is the government in such a tight spot?
Because that is how government has always operated. This is not a new phenomenon because this government is in power, you know. Every month, that is how the Treasury operates. Money is coming and you pay based on what comes in. That is the reality. So when the Prime Minister, when we just came into government, said the country is broke, people didn't understand. When the Prime Minister prior to this said we need to start rationing what we are doing in terms of our expenditure. Because when we came into government, government was collecting on average between $70 and $80 million a month. That is the revenue intake of government. For the 3.5 years in government, when, as of this time last year, April or end of financial year, we were up to $110 million of earnings a month. So the economy had grown sufficiently where we were collecting close to $30 million more per month. And remember, that is against the backdrop of having dropped VAT from 15 to 12.5%. Our revenue intake. So this has nothing to do with the management of this government of the economy. That is how governments operate. Every month you have interest payments, you have salaries, you have loan payments. These are your top 3 priorities. After you've paid these, then whatever is left, that is what we call debt to GDP ratio. Our debt to GDP shows that, look here, this is what your revenue intake is, and this is what you are obligated to pay out. So your first obligation is to debt. So if we continue to pay salaries without any savings of cash flow, and that is what people need to understand. What we are managing is cash flow. You cannot tell somebody, take that desk and go home for your pay today. And I know they can tell me that's what you are trying to do with the bond, but it is not the same. We have a situation on hand now where we have loans that we must pay. We have bonds that are coming due that if it does not roll over, we have to pay out. We have obligations to run the hospitals and all of these things. All of this is from the same revenue.
That has been cut by at least 50%.
So the minimum amount of revenue we need to meet these obligations, interest, loan payments, and salaries, we need $77 million a month to meet these obligations. Presently, we are at a stage where last month we got about 50 or 55 million. This month we may get the same. Now, you had a rollover of a certain amount of money coming in that you are already owing for end of financial year. Because you know that is when the same ministries, and I can tell you, it happened across ministries. When end of year comes and the budget is there, and they see there's money that was allocated to them and they've not spent it, they run ahead and they buy a whole set of things. It happens across the government. Because they don't appreciate that a budget is just numbers that are there. The reality is how much of the revenue we collect. And in my very first year in government, upstairs the financial center back in 2007, when we were, no, 2008, because Sir John was the one who did the budget of 2007. When we sat on the committee to review the budget, you know what I was told? Government is not to make profit. So I asked them, the countries that have surpluses, where does the surplus come from? So we've learned in this country to run the government as hand to mouth. Every month you make just enough money to meet your obligations. That's why we had no sinking fund, we had no reserves, we had nothing set aside. So the day you run into a problem like we are today, where what you expect to come from the month, and I can tell them, go back to 2013, 2014, 2015, and find out how the Treasury operated. You would have receipts that you have to pay of X amount. Treasury would tell you, we can only pay X amount today. Based on what we collect tomorrow, we will pay this. So every day, there was a schedule at the Treasury Department of what would be paid and what would not be paid. So this is not a situation created by this government. For that matter, we've made the government much more liquid than what we inherited, because much more revenue has come in. So the issue that we were discussing with the unions, is to say to them, if we get to a month where there's a debt that does not roll over and you default, all the loans you have coming in will stop. The IMF will come in, because once there is a technical default, so if you go and try and negotiate before the debt is mature or due, that is considered a technical default. If you do so, it means that you can no longer meet your obligations, and then they would stop, the IMF would come in. So what they're saying about, there are not much conditions to the $29 million from the IMF, other than the restrictions of what you can use the money for. But if the IMF comes in and introduces a program where you have defaulted, and they will say, okay, we will now prescribe to you. When they prescribe to you, it means that your public servants will either take a permanent pay cut, or they will be required to send a certain percentage home. Jamaica went through it. Grenada went through it. And all of them are telling you, this is a good thing. Look at how well these countries are doing. Maybe that's what we need in
But Barbados went through it quite recently after Honorable Mia Motley came in.
So indirectly, what they are saying to us is we need a structural adjustment within the government. Because if they are saying these countries, because of the structural adjustment, have done so well, is that what? Now we are saying, let us be our own IMF. Let us put the restrictions on ourselves, so there's no need to reduce employment at this stage. So you keep all your workers employed. You ask them to take a deferred payment rather than a cut in payment. It is better somebody is owing you than nobody is owing you, because at least you live with the hope that one day you will get paid. But if you're not working and nobody owing you, you cannot expect anything. So I'm saying that for me, that was a simple matter. To say help the government with managing the cash flow. So the $50 million that the government is trying to save over that 3 months is to give a buffer to be able to raise all of the revenues. So the $20 million that we are negotiating with the Taiwanese has not come in. The monies from CDB, some of it has not come in. What we are negotiating with World Bank. So we believe that over the next 3 months, all of these revenues would have been collected. And we would be in a position to pay full salaries going to the end of the year. And by the end of the year, we would expect that the economy have picked up sufficiently that if it means we need to take a loan to pay the public servants, we have rolled out a bond for the CIP program. It's just going into the market. By the time you would sell these bonds and collect the money. So all we are doing is trying to manage cash flow for now. That is all what it's not about management of the economy. We are satisfied that we can manage this economy sufficiently well to be able to come to the end of the year and to pay the public servants the free 50% for the 3 months, which adds up to 1.5 months of salary for the entire public service. So if the salary of the public service as we speak is, let's round off the figure to $40 million, it means that we would have to come up with $60 million at the end of the year to be. So if we can get by March next year to our pre-COVID numbers in terms of the generation of money within the local economy. From that alone, you would get the extra $60 million that you need to pay off the public servants, that with the 3% interest. So I'm saying to everybody, let us not panic in the situation. Let us work to resolve that problem. Because at the end of the day, if the country defaults, everybody suffers. Why not make a little sacrifice for the 3 months? And we've said it, Ministry of Finance, work out the numbers. If you're the banks already give, and that is why the timing is critical. Why the timing is critical? Because from March, we've been talking to the banks about a 6 months moratorium. If we go past that period, we get to the point where the moratoriums from Lucilec, from Wasco, from the banks, everything will run out. And eventually, you will now be in a position where salaries are cut and you have to make the full payments. Whereas if we do it now, why are we having all of that discussion? Because legislatively, we cannot force the unions and their workers to accept a payment of bonds. But the government can go to Parliament and can propose a cut in salaries. We are not in favor of cutting public servant salaries because we believe in the environment that we are in. This is not the best way to go. But if you are left with no choice, rather than let the whole country default as a result, we may be forced to take other measures that otherwise we would not have subscribed to. So I'm hoping that good sense will prevail between now and Tuesday, and then we can look at the options that are available to us. So I'm really hoping that people will understand the money is not lost. If you have savings in the bank, you're getting about maybe 1.5% interest. We are giving 3% interest at the end of the period. Barbados came and Barbados called it mandatory savings. And some of the same people in St. Lucia want to applaud what Barbados is doing. What's the difference?
And there has not been an announced time frame as opposed to here where we have for 3 months. There's no time frame that has been given for Barbados.
Mr. Minister,
for that matter, final point on what Barbados has said, even in the private sector, some people have agreed to take 100% deferred salaries, because it is better you keep your job and you keep the business that you are in operational. So because we will recover from COVID. The question is not every business will recover. And the more we can do to help as many entities to survive that period, the better our chances of coming back from it quickly.
I found, Primus, you'll come in with the question from HTS in a moment. Just a quick comment that, because when I followed the Barbados situation, I found it quite interesting, like how similar the situations are and with us. And the Prime Minister indicated that what they were asking of the civil servants is really to allow to give the government the fiscal space in order now to be able to undertake capital projects in order to keep the economy vibrant. So in order for it not to die off, so that to give the government some space, get capital projects to inject some life into the economy there in Barbados. We have a question along those lines from HTS. Primus?
Yeah, from Solange Alfred of HTS. And the question is, recently you spoke of public service reform. Given the efficiency you stated that was obtained by a depleted workforce, you brought across the point that the job is still being done with less persons coming to work. How quickly is the government looking to enact this reform? Will reform mean loss of jobs, or rather a shuffling of individuals around in various ministries? Have union representatives been engaged in dialogue on the proposed reform of the public service.
Now, I also want to add to that, Minister. Don't forget, I just want to, because it's along those lines coming in from Michael George of The Voice. So he says that the government for the past 2 months, you've been able to pay the public servants their full salaries. How long will the government continue to do this? And also, what is the government's next move if the public servants refuse to budge from the position of full pay?
I think the government's position, I will leave for the Prime Minister to articulate. I think I can safely say from my position that from where we are financially, by the time we pay 1 more month of salaries, I think that would be it for us as far as our ability to meet all of the obligations at this point in time. So definitely something we'll have to give at this point in time. Going to, I wanted to add one point before. On the Barbados situation, it's slightly different from us because the previous government had legislated that they could not cut
salaries.
The salaries. Yes. I think other than that, you might have seen a cut. So the government just found a creative way of going around it. And that's what I tell people. Sometimes we don't appreciate frankness and honesty. The Prime Minister came and explained our exact situation, said what it was, and engaged the unions in dialogue, not in negotiations, because we cannot force it on anybody. So we just explained the situation and thought that they would have understood and cooperated. I will not use NTN to deal my political issues on this. I will go to the public media, but some of the statements being made by personnel who, when one government is in office, says one thing, and when another says something completely different, the things I want to say about them, it does not permit me. I will not allow NTN to be dragged into this. I will deal with this separate. But going to the questions raised by Primus.
Solange Alfred of HDS.
Yes. The government reform focuses primarily on retooling. There's a fear that efficiency is going to reduce the number of persons. That's not the case. We have to understand the big picture. The big picture of this government is to double the GDP. If you're going to double the GDP, I can tell you the public service is too small as it is. So people must not, you see, if you take one statement in isolation of everything else we are saying, then you would understand. And I always tell people, as a student of the Bible, I always apply this. The Bible is you take here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept. That is how, because it is not conflicting. You may read something here that sounds very different, but by the time you put all the pieces together, the puzzle is complete, and it does not contradict itself. So our approach to governance is not contradictory. We don't say one thing when it's convenient, and when it's not convenient, we say something else. So let me put this in perspective. We said that we don't want to increase taxes. But the way to generate more revenue for the country is to broaden the tax base. So you can lower taxes and you can collect more money. And we proved it on the VAT. When we reduced VAT from 15% to 12.5%, today we are collecting more revenue on the VAT than we did at the 15%, because there's greater economic activity across the board. I wouldn't say all of that is totally attributed to the reduction of VAT, but I'm just using that as an example to make the point. So when we say we need to double the GDP of this country, it means that if the GDP of St. Lucia is $3.5 billion, we need to go to $7 billion. What does it take to get the economy to be at $7 billion? You need more roads, number one. That's why there's a heavy focus on infrastructure. And the infrastructure includes roads, water, electricity, all of these things, because you want to grow. It means that if you double the GDP, you need more houses, you need more electricity, you need more water, you need more internet penetration, you need all of that. Then we go to the other part of it, the service, your Inland Revenue Department. If you now have to collect twice the amount of money that you are collecting today, do you have the present capacity internally to do so? Now, if you're not going to double the size of the public service, then you need greater efficiencies. So go into the e-platform for government, offering 150 plus services that government offers on an e-platform, reduces the line and creates greater efficiency. But that does not mean that you necessarily need less people. You need people with a different ability. And what we've been doing in discussions with the Minister of Education, and she's having discussions with the board of SAAFA, is to develop an academy at SAAFA to help retool your people within the service. So take our teachers, for example, to go on the e-platform. What do we need to do to retool the teachers? Does that mean you need less teachers? Not necessarily. If you're going to have globally competitive education, you may not want a class of 30 students to one teacher. You may want a class of 15 for now. More one-to-one tuition. More. So there are lots of things that there's a misconception because people lose sight of the big picture. And so everything we are doing, so when I spoke about the efficiencies, the ministries can be efficient with less staff. And that's a fact. And everybody knows that. Because the hours being put in, we hardly get 8 hours from some people at all. The time they walk in, the number of hours they have for lunch, and the time they leave. And that's a reality. And I know some people may not vote for me because I say that about them, but it doesn't really matter. Because when the Prime Minister of Antigua says that the lazy and the very lazy ones will be the first to go, regardless of their political affiliation. So some people applaud him because he's the Prime Minister. But if the minister in St. Lucia says that, then he's castigated. When the former prime ministers said that our people are not equipped for the jobs that we are hiring them for, 70% was the number that they gave.
But we also have a survey that shows that, and the investor survey that shows that our people are not, the education level does not necessarily match up with what the market may be asking for.
So that is what we are saying. So is it that we have too many teachers? Is it the curriculum? What is it? So it is to get to the bottom of these things. So government reform, the e-platform, and I can say we were at an advanced stage, and same problems, efficiencies again, and timeliness. So we should have launched the government licensing, new licensing system 3rd of January. You know what the problem was? We could not get the matters rectified with the bank for the credit card payments. So even though we had the entire thing laid out, there was no means to do the payment. So this delayed the process. I'm told we are launching the new driver's license, and we would come with the sample and everything to NTN to do the launch. So you will get the first set of news on this. But up to this morning, I was dealing with that. So I don't want people to get the perception that it's about cutting public service, and it's making it more efficient, it's retooling our people, and it is better preparing us for the growth that we are looking for. Because we cannot sustain our standard of living with the size of the economy of St. Lucia. It means that you'd have to continue to tax other people, which is what the previous government was doing. Our focus is lowering taxes and broadening the base. So have more things to tax. So if 10% of 3 billion and 10% of 6 billion is double, The 10% is the same, but the intake is double. So this is where this government is going. That's why I tell people we have a clear plan of development and how it is going to materialize. And even if people question that, we are not attacking people. I want to give everybody in my constituency a job in the government if I could. I would love to do that. That guarantees my re-election. But is that first priority? Can you pad up the public service to the point where you eventually crash everything and you cannot pay anybody? It's not practical. You do not govern in this manner.
We have a question along those lines. Dennis on our Ask Me Anything platform wants to know, Minister, would you agree that not all the ministries are created equal and therefore can't work efficiently without its current numbers?
I agree. I agree that not all ministries are the same, and not all ministries would have the same level of efficiency. So if you look at my transport department, heavily understaffed. You look at my CDP and accounts department, we handle DVRP, we handle CDP, we handle St. Jude's. I have about 3 or 4 members of staff in accounts department. They have to deal with everything. Okay? I look at other ministries with 3 times the amount of staff that we have. So, I know all ministries are not the same. And I'm telling you, government can be more efficient. And if you want to carry out a survey, in all the surveys they carry out, go and ask the public. How many times they have to call me for simple matters because the attending officer at the desk does not pay attention. You know how many times papers lose from upstairs to downstairs? And we are supposed to accept this? I'm supposed to sit here and agree that somebody brings in that document, you put it in the deep upstairs, and between taking it from the deep upstairs to reach downstairs, it has disappeared? That every time something goes to Treasury, there's a mistake on it, and these people cannot get paid. And I can tell you, as we speak, there are contractors who work in March, in February, who have not been paid because of the same cash flow situation. But they have used their resources. They have executed jobs for the government. So we are more than $70 million owing in works that has to be paid and other things. But we are saying, pay all public servants their salaries and leave these people who have used their resources to do things stranded for now and wait until these funds come in to pay them. We are saying, let's strike the balance. So I believe my ministry can be more efficient with less staff. And I make no bones about it. I said to the Ministry of Finance, review my ministries, tell me this is your recurrent expenditure, you need to cut it by X amount, and the hierarchy of the ministry, the PS and everybody, we will sit down, we will review our recurrent expenditure, and we will make the determination as to how to make the ministry efficient. Because that is what every business is doing today. And they keep on telling me government is not a business. That's why it will go bankrupt.
I have a question coming in from Loop News. The Trade Union Federation has publicly offered to waive a 1% salary increase. Government ministers are due to a 55% wage increase. Will Cabinet also suspend salary increases?
We cannot suspend salary increases. We've taken a 75% pay cut. When I say pay cut, deferred payment. So let's be practical. Should ministers be the only ones to make the sacrifice? So let me enlighten the person by telling them, this government did not introduce that pay increase. When we came into government in 2007, we found a commission that had been charged with the responsibility of giving increases. Back, I think, in 2008 8 or 10 thereabout, the public servants took their increases. We were in government then. We did not take our increases. We lost the next election. The Labour Party came into office. Dr. Anthony stood up in the House and said they are not taking the increase, and he has instructed his parliamentarians that they are not taking the increase. It remained that. As soon as they lost the elections, they took the government to court. So a case was filed. The Attorney General is the one who represents the government. A case was filed, I think, by Dr. Lewis and a couple other persons who said that the payment is due because it's not a question of deferred payment or anything. It had been taken. We had not tabled it in Parliament, but once it was tabled in Parliament, it became effective. And it was retroactive. When the payment came in, when the decision came in, the AG had to go in and negotiate with the parties concerned, and an agreement was arrived at. And further to that, even the money that was owed to us, which is backdated, they agreed to pay us 1/3 of the money. And the next 2/3 of the money to be paid September this year and September the following year. And we did not even get a tax break, even if the government has our money for the last 10 years. More than 10 years, from 2007. So I'm saying that people need to be practical and realistic about what they are saying. The 17 parliamentarians, I know that the ministers in the government were the first ones to agree that we would take a 75% deferred payment. So you know what my salary is going to be? About $3,000 for the month. You know what my phone bill is for the month? Because everybody who calls you as a parliamentarian or a minister, can you call me back? Thanks to WhatsApp now, you can make a lot of the calls via that means. But I'm just saying, so people need to be practical and stop playing these cheap games about what is happening and who's making sacrifice and who's not making sacrifice. Can you imagine we were given duty-free for a vehicle to the value of 100,000 CIF? Any vehicle you buy as a parliamentarian that has a higher CIF value than $100,000, you have to pay the difference in duty. Yet still we are the same ones who sit in cabinet, and every business and everybody who applies, we give them 100% duty free on their vehicles. We cannot even make a decision for ourselves to give ourselves the vehicle of choice. And I always tell people, duty free is duty free. When people want to give a Corolla, a Toyota Corolla, they'll give you duty free on it because it's a reasonably priced car. But because you buy an Audi or a BMW, they will not give you. What kind of thinking is this? Duty free is duty free. Which one does the government make more profit on? The one with the higher value, the government makes more profit on it. So if everybody who's buying a duty free would buy a high-end vehicle, it's better. Because when they have to buy the parts, it's not duty free. The tires, the insurance on it, everything else that the government collects revenue from is going to be higher. So we have a mindset about people and about things, and that's what we need to move away from. For us to be successful and to grow as a country, we need to change that mindset and think that because that person have a certain house or a certain vehicle, that they think that they are there. Sometimes you don't think anything of yourself. That's what you're comfortable with, and that's what you can afford.
So we have a question coming in from the Ask Me Anything platform. Amelia, thank you so much. Did government entertain the idea of increasing tax on alcohol as a way to generate revenue? If not, why?
Anything you overtax, people find a way to beat the system. So let's take duty-free as an example. You see, because that is the reaction of people in general. everything tax, tax, tax. You have to create an enabling environment for businesses to do well. Then when you begin to overtax people, we cannot even control the people coming out of Matnik, even in a COVID situation. We cannot control those who go into St. Vincent. So if you put a tax that is too high on any product in St. Lucia, you know what? You're creating a market outside of St. Lucia for these things to be smuggled in, and you collect nothing from it. So people need to understand the balance between how much you can tax any single product on the island. Because once you create a tax system that becomes too burdensome, people find every creative way of beating the system. So you would find all the duty-free shops now selling more because all of a sudden, all I have to do is go when somebody come in and get somebody with a ticket and let them buy me something. But now, if the tax is fair, people pay their fair share of taxes, they contribute, then you don't have to worry about that. We cannot, every time we in a difficult situation, say go back and tax, because it is the same people you are taxing. Not a different set of people. It's not some people you import in from outside and then you go into tax them and the tax does not apply to your people. It applies to your own people. So I believe the best way to generate revenue in this country is to get as much foreign direct investment as possible, grow your economy, broaden your tax base, lower your taxes, and you collect more money.
We have another comment question from the Ask Me Anything platform from Benny. Thank you so much. Would like to congratulate the government of St. Lucia and everyone else for doing a great job keeping us safe. So the question is, when you say that the borders will be reopening, does that include the seaport as well to accommodate luxury yachts? And what are the requirements for those private luxury vessels coming into the island?
The borders being open, there are 3 stages of the opening that was highlighted. I don't want to misquote what the Ministry of Health and what they have said, but I would love to have some luxury yachts come into St. Lucia at the marina, because, you know, when these yachts come in, you know how much fuel they're going to buy when they are here? You know how much supplies they will buy? Now, what we've found is that a lot of people with their private jets and their luxury yachts have been stuck in their countries and they are desiring to get out. What they want to do is to fly in their private jet into St. Lucia, find somewhere to park their jet, and jump on their yacht and go. We would welcome that. All you have to do, because they're not even staying in, but they're going to be paying their landing fees. They're going to be paying for the airlines to be parked there for the period of time. They're going to get their supplies. They're going to pay their docking fees at whether the marina or the port catcheries or wherever. You take them in an enclosed vehicle, the people properly protected, get these people from the vehicle into their yachts, and they go about their business. You collect whatever fees. That is how you generate money. And every dollar counts at this point in time. We're not going to compromise health standards, but we are going to do what is necessary to allow the country to move and to rebuild the economy.
We have another question from Ask Me Anything platform here from Rolina. Thank you. Good day, Minister. Will vendors be getting any help from the government, from the social stimulus package, which the Prime Minister spoke about? Because the country is open for business, but we have no business. The hotels that we operate from, we do not know when they will be going back there. So that's pertaining to the NIC payment, I would imagine, as well as any other assistance packages.
So let me make a very precise and pointed statement on this. There's always the informal economy in any department, any country you go into the world. But more and more we are seeing the vulnerabilities of being part of the informal economy. And we have said to people, I remember as president of the National Council, for years I tried to get members to make an NIC contribution. All of a sudden, everybody realized that the bottom has dropped out and the value of these entities. And the government now must become the insurance for all of these people, because that becomes the expectation. Whereas, if all of these people, during their limited business, was making a limited contribution, was registered somewhere, but you see, everybody wants to operate under the radar. And then, when the exposure comes, everybody wants to say, well, I need to be taken care of. That is why the government, and I want to assure the person, yes, there are measures in place to assist them, but it cannot remain this way. That is why it was being channeled through the NIC. But there's been a lot of back and forth about the MOU and the arrangement. And so I think the last discussion we had is that we are contemplating that maybe NCF or SSDF may be better placed to put these resources through so that these persons can go. But we still believe that everybody who has some form of employment, and people should not be afraid of being taxed, because they are not going to be taxed. The first $18,000 or $23,000 of your earnings is not taxed. Most of these people don't make that net payment, that net return at the end of the year. So the fear of paying tax is keeping a lot of people away from being part of it. So there were some issues that was being dealt with. I want to assure them that within the coming week, we should see some movement in those people who are within the informal part of the economy, beginning to make some progress in terms of getting some payments through to them. I think the final things are just being worked on by the Ministry of Equity and the Ministry of Finance to get that resolved. But that should be a wake-up call to all of us in St. Lucia, that we should, whatever our business activity is, all legitimate business activities should be recognized and registered somewhere. So, because we don't know, today we have COVID, next time we may have something that's even worse than that. So I believe that this should be a call for us to come back to the table and be part of the formal economy. And people should not be afraid. No, but that is why the government is looking at lowering taxes, because that's what we are saying. When you overtax people, everybody run away and you lose more. So if we can bring business tax down to 15%, then you can capture a wider pool of persons. And if the businesses are doing well, you go for volume, so you collect more.
We want to ask you, Minister, I know our time is quickly running out. Let's get to transportation. Thank you, Noella, for your question regarding the bus scheduling. When will rotation end? Because as it is, she's saying that she's only working 2 days a week.
Rotation for the buses?
Yes.
Well, the rotation for the buses will end once the volume picks up. And that's what we are saying. With no tourists coming in, school is out. If we stop construction activity, I'm telling you, there is going to be no activity. And that is why I want the same persons within the public service and the unions who are trying to advise us that you should not be pushing ahead with you need things to stimulate economic activity. So if at St. Jude's we have 300 people working, at least 200 of these people are taking public transport to get there. That creates more demand. So these people may need somebody to do something at home for them. If they cannot pay, they don't employ these persons. So it is as the economy continues to, more things are open, and more activity is generated. And it's only money that generates activities. So the salaries of public servants alone cannot generate the activity you need. You need every other sector to be getting a few dollars to make the economy work the way that it ought to.
Okay, Mr. Minister, we will take one more question before we venture into Creole. From Solange Alfred again of HTS. There has been concerns raised by the minibus sector regarding the number of passengers on buses and the continuation of operations given the lack of profit generated by a low number of passengers. When will the stringent measures of 10 persons to a bus be relaxed? If it will not be relaxed, what measures is government going to put in place to provide bus operators with a reprieve?
So we already have something working on a subsidy for the bus sector. We were owing them some money already, which we are expecting from some of the revenues coming in, that we will be able to pay that backlog that we had for them. By then we would be engaged with the National Council on how they operated, what is a suitable number, because we cannot adequately compensate for their losses. But we would be able to meet them somewhere along the way to assist in that. That is being done. The issue of when will the matter change, a lot of that is dependent upon the Ministry of Health and how they guide us. Because at the end of the day, while I would love to say to the buses, operate with your 14 passengers, a lot of what we decide is based on the situation as it exists. And as we get directives from the CMO, we sit down and we review and we make that determination. So I want to assure them that we must not forget that even if today St. Lucia does not have an active case of COVID, the COVID pandemic is not over. The threat is still looming. And a month or 2 weeks can change things dramatically. So we must never lose sight of the time that we are living in. So you see, it is so easy, now that we are speaking the economy, to lose sight of COVID. But the threat is there. The threat of a resurgence is still looming, and by the time we start bringing the St. Lucians back home, even outside of the tourists, we begin to be exposed again. So all of these things must be factored in. So we want persons to know that is why we keep certain measures in place, that people still understand it is not business as usual. I still have my mask here. But it's not because I want to walk around with a mask, and every time I go into my office I have to have a mask, and I go into the vehicle. It's the most uncomfortable thing, but at the end of the day, we have to learn to live with it, because it's not about convenience at this point in time. It's about what is the best that we can do presently.
I mean, Monsieur le Ministre, nous tenons pour rester derrière Timiette, parce que nous tout prêts là pour venir. Ou tout cher, c'est tellement pris. Point. Situation pour ouvrir pays, situation pauvre pour chaîne pays vivant, situation affaires service civil, avec salaire, avec toutes ces autres points on fait là. Moi, ça qui m'a dit, mettez tout ça ensemble pour expliquer nous avant de faire le programme là, parce que là c'est tellement bagaille côté point on fait là. Nous quand pour nous l'autre programme seulement à créole pour discuter ça.
Nous quand nous faire en créole seulement. Ça moi juste voulais dire pour tout le monde qui a écouté, c'est ça nous a discuté aujourd'hui ni pour faire qui manière pays a mettre quoi dans position pour vie ouvert, pour ça manager l'économie, pour moun sa vie en travail, pour l'argent sa vie commencer rouler en pays pour faire bagay qui nécessaire. Premier ministre l'a dit dat premier bagay nous te ka essayer pour faire, c'est pour manager situation santé dat nous te ka manager bagay ça dans manière côté nous te kay ça conduit qui manière nous manager combien moun qui joignent malade Covid là et qui préparation nous te pour faire. So nous fait préparation côté nous entrer en l'hôpital IU9 là et nous dit l'hôpital Victorial qui servi comme place là pour sa bâti pour manager situation. Quand nous avons parlé là, travail qui a pris place à l'hôpital Victoria pour aider, pour séparer ces chambres-là, pour ça, il y a de manière côté chaque monde. Si un monde vient avec malade là, dat yo kay sa meilleur dans la chambre, séparé par quoi yo from l'autre monde, so yo pas kay sa affecter l'autre monde. Nous ni se bay ça qui a pris place. Et comme ça qui a pris place, nous ka position pays, nous ka mettre pour pays dans position pour nous ça ouvert airport et la wad la côté business qui commencé. Pour ces bâtiments qui amènent touristes, ça poko kay vie because yo même a dans di yo zadi about l'année 2021 a dans di yo pa kay vie en opération. Mais nous avons essayé pour West Airport là, nous te mis en date pour 4 juin. Mais ça nous avons essayé date, c'est les autres pays à poko ça mette koyo pour joindre ces règles là nous met en place là. So côté moun na kay ni pour point on test 48 net de temps avant y venir. Même si nous n'y pas sur airport ici pour ça check ces moun nan le yo vini ek bay, mais ces pays a même so c'est avion même c'est plane nan poko pa we pour voler. So nous ka dépend asu yo pour ban nou date qui le yo kay pa we. Nous n'y a chay Saint-Lucien dehors Saint-Lucie qui c'est différents pays qui vle vie mais yo poko sa vie yo qu'espé laisser avion kay commencer voler encore. So toutes ces bail ça nous ka met en place. Ça gouvernement a essayé faire, c'est pour nous ça ouvert travail en pays. Et travail là nous ka garder c'est travail en ligne de construction, so côté chimène pour bâti, côté airport, travail Saint Jude, travail sous ces différents community center, l'hôpital Denry, nous y a l'hôpital pour commencer souffouiller aussi. So tout ce travail ça nous ka essayer pousser devant. Nous ni des community center pour bâtir en choisir, nous ni en Odson, yon Bexon, nous ni yon Mikou qui já commencé, nous ni en health center en Mikou qui já commencé, nous ni en choix sous l'école Mikou qui a commencé pour bâtir aussi. So tout ce travail ça nous ka garder, c'est pour argumenter pour moun qui partenaire rien qu'a fait. Pour yo sa joindre yon de jour travail en ces bail ça pour commencer faire économie aller.
Saint-Jude bien avancé dans on est bail ka marché.
Oui, Saint-Jude yo cassé because roof Saint-Jude c'est un roof qui a fait en maçon parce que nous met un helipad ça va couiller côté en hélicoptère ça vini et land à sous tête l'hôpital là so sous une emergency ex Saint-Jude pour mener yo ex si c'est from Castry parce que nous ka garder pour mettre en bail pour ça faire l'opération pour chair et pour si un moun ni en 20 40 chair yo qui bouché pour ça yo ka couiller stint là pour ça mettre chair nous ka garder toutes ces bail ça pour ça faire Saint-Jude so nous là ni a chay bail qui ka fait et c'est travail ça c'est pour aider par des temps touristes et l'autre monde pour que ça venir en pays pour mener l'argent d'or c'est travail ça quand ça fait l'argent marché en pays.
Évidemment anti commission pour ces servantes civiles là parce que ça c'est un topic qui
well ces servantes civiles là nous parler avec yo et nous ça nous te ka essayer faire yo comprendre c'est pour bail gouvernement ti soulagement pour abouezan pour 3 mois pour d'accord pour accepter 50% en paiement yo et l'année pour juste pour 3 mois et après 3 mois yo kay joindre full salaire pour l'instant l'année so nous just espérer that nous kay joindre un rapport from you ka dit that yo d'accord pour coopérer because pas du temps nous commander tout gens l'autre pays pour faire sacrifice pour ban nous aide, nous commander Taiwan ni un problème yo, nous commander World Bank, IMF, CDB, toutes ces institutions nan nous ka deal et puis là, nous commander yo pour ban nous anti-indé. Les yo ouais sacrifice nous-mêmes d'accord pour faire. Ça kay ba yo plus confiance en ça nous ka faire pour ban nous anti-indé. Mais si yo ouais dat position nous c'est nous pas mêler ça qui fait c'est juste ban nous l'argent nous moun pas ka vle aider moun qui en situation comme so tout ces bail ça nécessaire et nous ka kwe dat yo kay d'accord pour point parce que moun qui grade yon pour 6 et moi quoi c'est moun qui ka joindre salaire pour $2,500 salaire yo pas kay affecter pièce. C'est moun salaire yo en haut ça qui kay joindre half salaire yo just pour 3 mois et l'autre half salaire pour 3 mois ça yo kay joindre ya bout l'année et yo kay joindre à 3% l'antéwe à sous ça. Moi pas quoi ça c'est un bail qui trop pour être pour demander parce que nous ja parlé que c'est banque là c'est credit union là c'est moun nan nous porter parler bail c'est moun qu'on cote avec ces différents places ça et moi savent date premier ministre là te faire démarche pour engager ces moun ça afro Chamber of Commerce pour ça garder si yo kay bail ces moun nan anti soulagement durant temps ça aussi so ça nous ka ouais c'est plus di yo kay joine plus l'argent sec en la main yo pour aller home yo parce que yo pas ni pour payer ces loan et ces bail là durant 3 mois ça.
And thank you so much, Minister. Thank you, Primus. It has been a very lengthy discussion here today with the Minister for Economic Development, Civil Aviation, and what's the other? I know that housing. We didn't get a chance to talk about housing, but we know we'll have to make a separate invite for that. Thank you so much, Honorable Guy Joseph, for spending time with us. We want to let you know that the next invitation for your access to the Information Command Center, that comes in at 3:30 this afternoon. We have Tony Nicholas in then. I'm Melissa Joseph alongside Primus Hutchinson saying thank you so much for watching, and we do hope that the information has been valuable to you.